everyone, welcome back to Tao Talks. I'm Adam Michael Berger, Director of Evangelization here at Assumption Church, and this month I wanted to have a conversation around developing a mature faith. And the way that I wanted to look at this is how we can use the example of Jesus as a way for us as Christians to live in a mature faith, to actually live out our faith in a way that is better developed and more centered on Jesus and rather than on ourselves. And so I wanted to talk about specifically how we can reject cultural ideals that we can maybe consider toxic, that Jesus himself didn't exemplify, and see how he did live his life as a way to counteract that kind of toxicity. So if you were to talk about maybe toxic masculinity, when we're talking about Jesus, we're talking about authentic masculinity here. So I wanted to give kind of a definition of what this toxicity looks like when we talk about this term toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity, in the generally accepted definition, a cultural concept of manliness that glorifies stoicism, strength, virility, and dominance, and that is socially maladaptive or harmful to mental health. So first, let's talk about the idea of mental health. Specifically, we as men, in my experience as a man, and I understand, first of all, and I want to give the disclaimer that I have a unique experience that may not necessarily be everyone's experience, that I as a husband and as a father, as a man, may have a little bit different experience from yours. And so I identify that I am sharing this from my perspective, and that yours may not necessarily totally align with mine, but I feel like these are concepts that we can universally apply to help us live a more rounded, more mature faith. So let's talk about mental health. First and foremost, so much, especially lately, we've been hearing the importance of talking about and understanding mental health, and that the idea of mental health is something that's super important to us, regardless of what phase in life we're in, regardless of our gender or our expression or our lifestyle. We have to understand that mental health is something that's paramount and key to living a well-rounded life. So much of when I was younger was focused on not accepting mental health and using terms like you're crazy, you're out of your mind, things like that to denigrate the need to really take a look at mental health. And the reason why mental health is so important is because God made us a whole person. We are a physical body, we are an intellect, we are a spirit, we are a soul. These are all things that are intertwined with one another, and when one of these things falls out of balance and when we neglect them, it can affect all of them. That's why we talk about things within Christianity like the effect of sin. Now, I'm not talking about this in the terms of doing good or bad or making God happy with us, but when we do things that neglect the wholeness of our human person, especially in the terms of we are a reflection of the image and likeness of God, there are consequences. There are things that can happen that can really bring us down, that can cause harm to our very lives. And so understanding that mental health is part of living that, if you want to use the word holistic or whole lifestyle, it's really important to identify that. So let's take a look at some of these terms, regardless of where we're at in life, that can be considered toxic. First of all, let's talk about Stoicism. Let's talk about the fact that for so many of us, we were told to suck it up, stop crying, don't do that, choke it down, we don't cry, boys don't cry, that kind of mentality. And the reason why this wholly, W-H-O-L-L-Y, doesn't align with being a Christian is because Jesus didn't live that way. It's that simple. In Scripture, we see Jesus live the entirety of the human experience. We know that he is like us in all things but sin. But his experience as a human, when we talk about the incarnation, putting on flesh, becoming human, he experienced everything that we did. We have this weird misconception of who Jesus is, that he just kind of magically was birthed into the world and floated through life without ever making mistakes or never feeling things. He never kind of got upset, and he never got happy, and he never got sad. He was just always this kind of even keel Zen master, and that's not who Jesus was. We see very early on that in his ministry that Jesus attends a wedding feast. And you wouldn't be at a wedding feast. You don't just show up to a wedding feast. In his culture, you had to be invited, and that means that you were close to those people. And if Jesus is at a wedding feast, he's not just sitting there stone-faced, not having a good time, just kind of the whole time. He's elated, he's excited, he's joyful, he's happy, he's celebrating, he's smiling, he's laughing. That's who Jesus was. And at moments in his life, he also experienced great sadness and hurt. At the death of his friend Lazarus, it said Jesus wept. When him and his friends went to the temple and he saw what the money changers were doing, he became enraged. He became so furious at the disrespect for this place of worship that it was turned into such a mockery of what God had intended that it filled him with anger. That when he went to the cross, he even asked his Father, if there's a way for you to make this cup pass from me, let it be only done according to your will. He understood fear and anxiety, even about death itself. And when he was hanging on the cross, he looked down and he saw nobody that was with him before, only a few people, his mother and a couple of friends, and everybody else had abandoned him. So he understood desolation and isolation. He understood feeling abandoned and alone. He understood loneliness. And even after the resurrection, when he came back and all of his friends were in hiding and nobody knew what to do because they felt so scared, and even when he came back to them, some of them doubted, he understood this fullness of human experience. Jesus understood emotions. He understood his feelings. But what he understood more than anybody else is how our feelings shouldn't dictate our behavior. We're allowed to feel them. We should take stock of them and identify them, and then be able to properly identify them in the future. As somebody who personally suffers from anxiety, it's really important for me, especially as a husband, and even more so as a father, to be able to identify and articulate what I'm feeling with my kids. I want them to see me cry, whether I'm sad or I'm grieving or mourning, whether I'm having an anxiety attack and that's how it manifests myself, whether my anxiety manifests itself as anger. I want them to understand what's going on with me. Not because I'm trying to be perfect, but because nobody told me to be able to see what's happening, process it, and then be able to accept it and identify it when it's happening later on. That's how we live as a mature Christian. We are able to understand our emotions and the roots of those emotions and be able to properly identify them and not let them dictate and control how we live, but let them inform how we live. Strength. Strength and dominance sometimes go hand in hand when we talk about toxicity like that. And so much of my life, especially when I was younger, like when I played sports and when I was dating as a young man, it was all about like being the best. You know, like, so these things like strength, virility, dominance, they all kind of get intertwined with being the best at things, being the strongest at things. And if you're stronger than somebody else, then you're better than them. And if you do a better job at this thing, then you're better than them. And, you got to be with the right person and look the right way and have the right things. And none of those things are particularly important when it comes to Christian living. We see in the example of the early church that strength was found in relying on the community. So Christians came together, they pooled their resources, and they relied on one another to care for one another. That in Jewish culture, it was a normal thing that when women were widowed, that they were cast out, that they weren't allowed to be part of culture. They weren't allowed to be part of society. But the church said, you have a place here, and we're going to take care of you. We're going to make sure that you're okay. That families didn't go hungry. And what this comes down to is, and I'm going to take a microcosm from a macrocosm, right? As a kid growing up, I watched my father, who was extremely handy. Masonry, carpentry, electrical work, home repair, yard work. He understood all of this stuff and had a great eye and mind for these things. And a lot of times I felt inadequate because I didn't share the same passion and have the same skills that he had. And to some extent, I wish I had paid a little bit more attention, because now as somebody who owns a home and has a car and has to do things, I wish I maybe understood these things just a little bit better like he did. But at the same time, I understand that those things don't dictate my worth. And because for a long time I thought like, oh man, I can't do the same things that he can do. I'm not as manly as he is. I'm not as effective as he is. I'm going to be a disappointment. But then at the same time, every time somebody needs help setting up a new phone or a tablet or a computer, they got a question about something with technology, who do they come to in my life? They come to me because they understand they know about my background working in technology. So what that means is we as a community have a way to make each other stronger. It says in Scripture that one cord is weak, but when three cords are tied together, when they're twisted together, they gain their strength. Strength is found in reliance, in understanding our weak spots and our blind spots, identifying them and asking for help in those times. That's where real strength comes from. And you notice that in the example of Jesus, if we hold Jesus up as the example, Jesus did not come to dominate. It talks so often about how the Jewish people believed that the Messiah, who Jesus was supposed to be a conquering king, a military leader, this example of strength and dominance, and he wasn't those things. Jesus talked about being meek and how that the meek will inherit the earth. Meekness doesn't mean weakness. Meekness understands that I can be strong in some ways and need help in other ways, and be able to identify those things and not be afraid to ask for that help. Toxicity talks a lot about virility, and I think that sometimes we get caught very much into the concept of, if I don't live this kind of lifestyle, have this kind of marriage, have this many kids, then I'm a failure. And that's not what Christian living actually says. We as Christians pass on who we are, and more importantly, who Jesus is, who God really is, by the way that we live our lives. You know, we hear that song sometimes in church, and they'll know who we are by our love. They're not going to know who we are by the amount of things that we built or the amount of money that we made. They're going to know who we are by how we invested our love. There's a great song by a band. Oh my gosh, why am I blanking on the band right now? The lyric is, in these bodies we'll live, in these bodies we'll die. Where you invest your love is where you invest your life. Mumford & Sons. There it is. Mumford & Sons in that song says, where you invest your love is where you invest your life. That is where the true deposit of faith comes from. That is where the true inheritance and the true legacy comes from. It's not by the amount of kids that we have or the kind of marriage we have or that it looks like it meets societal or family or cultural expectations. It's that how we live out love. Love is something that's meant to be given away. You know, love is a choice. Love is something that we choose to do every day. And the people that we love in our lives, we give that away freely. It's not something that's meant to be stored up. That's what it really means. When we live out authentic faith, when we live out a mature faith, we don't give in to stoicism and strength, the need to dominate or to be virile in an unhealthy way. We live out these things in the way that Jesus showed us to. And that's what gives us a mature, grounded, true faith. And that's my encouragement for you, is that to hold Jesus up as a standard of how we should live our lives as Christians. And that's what a mature faith looks like. I thank you so much for joining us as always here on Tau Talks. If you like this, make sure you like and you share out with people. And if you've got any suggestions for a future Tau Talk, please visit our website, assumptionsyr.org/Tau Talks. You can leave us feedback, you can give us a topic, and Friar Rick and I would love to hear about what you think about Tau Talks and what we can share with in a future session. We thank you guys so much. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.